Good morning. I'm Joanne Lee, Associate Pastor for Community Formation at Calvary Presbyterian Church. This faith community has a commitment to adult education and spiritual formation, offering online opportunities on Sundays as well as other times. During this pandemic, we can't gather as we normally would, but we still want to provide opportunities for learning, and today we celebrate Interfaith Sunday. We believe that a part of fostering our own faith includes interfaith dialogue and partnership, and Calvary has a long history of that with the Reverend Dr. Jim Emerson, Pastor Emeritus, who is one of the co-founders of San Francisco's Interfaith Council. Here in this city, we are lucky to have such a great diversity of faith traditions represented and working together for the common good. As we get started, I invite you to join me in prayer. Let us pray. God of many names, we thank you for the great diversity of ways in which we might know and experience you. We thank you for the technology that allows us to gather and to continue learning, even as we socially distance and try to keep one another healthy. We thank you for the commitment of those who helped make this day happen, our elders and leaders, those who work behind the scenes, and of course, the incredible interfaith leaders of this city. As we gather, open our hearts to hear and see something new, something fresh about how you are at work in the world, especially here in the Bay Area. Inspire us to greater understanding, greater compassion, and greater faithfulness. Amen. Today we have Michael Pappas, Rita Semel, and Betsy Dodd, who will share a bit about the San Francisco Interfaith Council. Michael is Executive Director of SFIC. Rita Semel is one of its co-founders and one of its greatest champions. And Betsy Dodd is Elder for Faith in Action here at Calvary, as well as a former president of the board of SFIC. Following their conversation, we will share an interfaith panel on encountering the other, how faith traditions help us navigate our divisions. Joining us in the panel are some amazing faith leaders who I am privileged to call colleagues. Fatih Atesh is director of the Pacifica Institute, San Francisco and East Bay branches, and he will be bringing a Muslim perspective. Reverend Victor Floyd is minister for spiritual care at Calvary Presbyterian Church, bringing a Christian perspective. Rabbi Jessica Zimmerman Graf is the senior rabbi at Congregation Shereth Israel, and she brings to us a Jewish perspective. Ron Kobata is recently retired from being the resident minister at the Buddhist Church of San Francisco, and he brings a Buddhist perspective. And Kaushik Roy is the executive director of the Shanti Project and brings a Hindu perspective. It was a true honor to moderate this panel. You all are in for a treat. Thank you again for joining us.
Good morning. My name is Betsy Dodd. I'm a member at Calvary Presbyterian Church, and I want to welcome you to a conversation that we're going to have with Rita Semel and Michael Pappas about the San Francisco Interfaith Council. The San Francisco Interfaith Council's mission is to celebrate our diverse faiths and spiritual traditions, bring people together to build understanding, and to serve our community. It was founded by our own Reverend Jim Emerson and Rita Semel and a couple other people in 1989. And Calvary has a long and close relationship with the council. The council is well known for assisting congregations with disaster preparedness, working on behalf of the homeless, and providing a platform for the city government, nonprofit service providers, and faith leaders to share information and work together. So I'm really honored to welcome both Michael Pappas and Rita Semel to today's conversation. And I'd like to start by introducing them. Michael has been the executive director of the council since 2007. He has served on the city's Human Rights Commission, the Aging and Adult Services Commission, the San Francisco Disaster Council, and numerous other nonprofit boards doing good work in the city. He is a congregant at Grace Cathedral. Rita Semel co-founded the Interfaith Council with several other faith leaders. She was chair of the board of the council for many years, and she still sits on the board of the council. She currently serves on the Human Services Commission at the city. She sits on the boards of Grace Cathedral, Clinic by the Bay, and the New Israel Fund Regional Council. Rita's a congregant at Temple Emmanuel, and she sits on the board of directors of the temple as well. And these are only Rita's current positions. If I tried to talk about what she's done in the past, it would take up all the time of this conversation. She's not only served on many boards, but she's actually started many wonderful organizations. And the one that came to mind for me was the San Francisco Council on Religion and Race, which she helped form some time ago. So I'd like to get started by asking Rita to tell us just a little bit about how the council got started.
Thank you, Betsy. You're most kind to have me, and I appreciate it. The Conference on Religion and Race got started as a result of a national conference on religion and race, which happened in Chicago in 1963, which was the first time that the faiths got together to discuss discrimination in the United States. And the only San Francisco participant was Father Eugene Boyle, who was a member of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, a wonderful, wonderful man, way ahead of his time in being concerned about injustice. And he came back to San Francisco and asked the Archbishop if we could have a similar conference here in San Francisco. And the Archbishop said, if the Jews and the Protestants agree, fine. And the Jews and the Protestants agreed. We had that conference in the fall of 1964. And we saw that the local conference lasted after the conference, and it became a weekly and a monthly meeting trying to do good things. And it did many good things during its time, but eventually it became clear that we had to do something more, how can I put it, positive, more general, and that was the beginning of the Interfaith Council, because the homeless issue was becoming a very, very important problem in San Francisco. I'm sorry to say we haven't solved it, but we're still working on it. And it happened because Mayor Art Agnos brought the congregations together and said he needed help. This was in December of 1988. I was not there because I was in the clergy, but the president of the Board of Rabbis came to me afterward and told me about it and said we had to be part of it. And that was where my relationship with Jim Emerson started, because Calvary was part of that initial group and a very important part of it. And so we got together and we got 4 or 5 congregations to open their doors. And then we started to work on getting congregations to provide meals, which we did. And when the thing was over in February, we thought we were done. And then came the Loma Prieta earthquake, and we knew we weren't done. We were just beginning.
Oh my.
So Calvary was a very important part of the beginning of the Interfaith Council. And I won't say we couldn't do it without Jim Emerson, but he certainly made it a better thing. One thing I forgot to mention is that he had gotten a grant from what's the name
Church
of it?
World Service.
Church World Service, yeah.
World Service, thank you. And he was told by them that he couldn't use it only for Protestants. He had to give it to everybody, which was such a wonderful example to the rest of us of how gifts to the community have to be all-encompassing. Nobody can be left out. We're all in this together.
That's a great story. That's a great story.
That money brought us together. And when we finished doing it, we realized that we hadn't really fought the fight yet, that the fight was yet to be fought. And that out of that came the Interfaith Council.
And I love how you weave Calvary into it too. That's very exciting. We're very proud of that that beginning with you way back when, Rita. That was a wonderful time, and great work has been done since then. So Michael, do you want to tell us a little bit about briefly about what the council has done and the accomplishments that you've had in the last however many years?
13 to be exact.
Yeah.
You know, we stand on the shoulders of Rita and some amazing people. So for the first 18 years of the life of the council, it was a volunteer organization. And Rita, as she says, is very good at doing unpaid jobs. And she was the de facto ED. And I came in 2007 after having served on the board for 3 years. And it was very clear how closely and interwoven we worked with Calvary. And you know, since beloved Jim Emerson worked with Rita, we've worked with Laird Stewart, who was beloved and a chairman of the board, Jim Kitchens, who was an interim, as well as John Weems. And I was just blessed a couple of weeks ago to meet your new pastor, Marcy Glass, and we are so looking forward to welcoming her and working together with her. I will say, and also on the lay side of things, we've had both Fran Johns and yourself, Betsy, serving on the board, and you've been just inspirational and have done amazing work. Our work with Calvary, too, is the work of the council. It's interesting because you have been without both the volunteerism and the financial support, we probably wouldn't be able to do the work that we've done for over 3 decades on hosting the Interfaith Winter Shelter, which is, you know, basically 4 congregations which offer up space from the Sunday before Thanksgiving to the end of March. And we have over 50 congregations that prepare meals, and we serve between 60 and 100 homeless men every day during that period. And it really is a labor of love that the city depends upon. But in addition to that, you know, we also marvel at something that happened post Loma Prieta, and that was the fact that both Congregation Shereth Israel and Calvary both went through retrofits. And in the course of that time, they created a model for interfaith relations where they lent each other their space in the sanctuary so that high holy days could be celebrated. But in addition to that, they did sacred text study, and they really, through this sharing, created a model for interfaith in neighborhoods, a model that I talk about often, and I think that it's one that should be emulated. You've also so graciously opened up your doors and you know, hosted iftar dinners, a sanctuary documentary. I remember Fran Johns making soup when we were talking about the homeless, and just filling your space to do good things, lectures and concerts, for which we are very, very grateful. So our work as a council, I would say, is dialogue, but dialogue through practice and through service. Because we believe that when people of different faiths are working together, they get to know each other at the most granular level, and relationships of trust are cultivated that way. And I think that that's probably the greatest foundation for interfaith dialogue is trust. We count as our constituents the 800 communities of faith in San Francisco, not just the congregations, but the judicatories, the healthcare and academic institutions, the faith-based social service agencies, as you said, and we have over 5,000 e-subscribers. So we are able to create this portal through which city government, as well as other NGOs, can have access to the faith community, and vice versa. We are just about everywhere. I look at a map of these 800 congregations, and so we are inextricably working collaboratively with the city on a lot of very key and important issues. And I know that you want to talk about civil rights a little later, and I know our time is probably precious, so I'll kick it back to you, Bets.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Rita, can you say maybe what you're most proud of that the council has done in your very long and illustrious time with the council? What do you look back on and say this, this was a good thing?
Well, that you really put me on the spot with that one, Betsy, because the council has done so much, and it's due to two things. It's due to our wonderful board. It's due to the fact that we've reached out and we have on our board representatives of all the different faiths in the city. San Francisco is supposed to be a very irreligious community, but you can't tell it from our board. We've got just about everybody sitting at the table. And we've also been able to do it because we were fortunate enough to snag Michael to be our executive director, and he's indefatigable and everywhere and manages to get us into all kinds of difficulties and problems, but we manage to solve them all and go ahead. And as a result, I think we've become a place where people go to if they want something, but also government officials go to. They know that we can provide a portal through which they can reach the faith community, and that I think is terribly important.
Yes, I agree. I've been also very impressed with what Michael has done in that particular arena, bringing different segments of our San Francisco society together to talk and work on projects together. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about the council's special role during the COVID crisis? Because I feel like the council has really played a special role here.
Absolutely. In the pre-conference conversation here, I was saying, I knew 13 years ago when I came into this position that because of our history with disaster preparedness and it being birthed out of Calvary in the aftermath of Loma Prieta, that we were going to be called upon in a time of crisis. I thought that crisis was going to be an earthquake. And my question was, we're going to be isolated for 72 hours, power's going to be down, how are we going to deal? This crisis was of a very different nature. And back in February, when the mayor declared the state of emergency, she convened all different sectors in something called the community branch at the Emergency Operations Center on Turk Street. And all of a sudden, we assumed this role as being the liaison between the city and our congregations of faith. And what that meant was that overnight, we became sort of the CNN, if you will, pushing out the official information of the city, communications, aggressive recommendations, health orders, getting also the clarity when the faith leaders needed to understand better what a lot of the legalese said about these health orders and how it impacted them. And then we started to also to harvest and compile and share the best practices congregations were turning to, which I really believe the collection of those two allowed our communities of faith very quickly to pivot to online worship and virtual ministry. The other thing that happened was everyone from the governor, the mayor, and Speaker Pelosi wanted to speak with our faith leaders. And so we started doing these convenings. They became so successful in the beginning that the city gave us a tech team, the virtual outreach team of the COVID Command Center. And so we're doing once a week what we were doing once a month, and basically inviting guests from the highest level of different sectors in the city to talk about how the COVID has impacted their sectors, but also to include faith folk who are in those sectors to also share how they've been impacted. We've done now 22 of these, and we've reached thousands upon thousands of folk, because not only are we speaking to those in attendance, but we're sending the recording link out to our 5,000 e-subscribers, and we've downloaded it on YouTube, so we can tell you just as how many people we have reached. I think what's been probably most helpful for the congregations too is that we're doing this in real time. As the health orders come out, we are given heads up, and we are extracting from those health orders the things that are most germane to the congregations. And so, we've been staying very close. The other thing we, at the very outset, that we began doing is when the Human Services Agency, which Rita sits on their commission, and the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, was looking for alternative spots before hotels became the solution. We were able to identify facilities and make sure that the permitting was done, so that if those sites were needed, and they will, if there is a future surge, to be able to provide them. I think we've risen to the occasion on that, and I'm so proud of our faith leaders who, in the midst of isolation, have been able to cultivate community. And I think the big challenge and task before them is going to be, as we emerge from isolation, is helping to navigate us back to connectivity as a community. Our faith leaders have literally in the pews, the most vulnerable sectors who've been impacted, the economic devastation and unemployment, the mental health issues, coupled with so many other issues, are our issues. And I know that they're going to rise to the occasion.
Yeah, wonderful. I've really appreciated those Thursday morning programs, and I highly recommend them to everyone.
I want to speak a little bit about the Thursday morning programs, if I may, Betsy.
Of course, Rita, please.
Because they have been focused on the issues that at the time are the most important. For example, the census. For example, voting. For example, homelessness, or whatever it is. Those Thursday morning meetings have taken up the issue and brought them to the whole community. And so I think that we have played a vital role, thank you, Michael, in making sure that everybody knows what's important, what needs to be done.
Rita, you brought up the issue of the census too. We're receiving funding, in particular from the San Francisco Foundation, to mobilize the faith community. We've been working with PICO at the state level to help, and we've been pushing out information on the census as well. It's a huge issue. There's so much at stake, but there's a recognition by both the funding community and the state of the significance of the communities of faith, because we know how to reach the hard to reach.
Well, that we play a vital role.
Mm-hmm.
We play a vital role, and by insisting that congregations then play their part, we move the frontiers out further and further, and can encapsulate more people.
I agree. It's a wonderful service. Well, I think maybe on that note, we should, actually, I'll ask a quick question. Can you report on anything, since this panel is going to be speaking a lot about how we heal our differences, how we approach the other, particularly with regard to race relations. And I'm wondering if you could speak very briefly, either one of you, whomever would like to, about what the council has done or is doing in terms of race relations.
I'm able to do that, and I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. How's that?
Thank you. That would be great.
No, I mean, because Dr. King was a pastor, civil rights has been always part of the DNA of communities of faith and the council. And, for over 10 years now, we've been hosting the annual MLK Day March and interfaith service. But that wasn't enough. And so several years ago, partnering with the Human Rights Commission, as well as University of San Francisco, we hosted a symposium on the role of communities of faith and faith leaders in today's civil rights movement, with the new voices, the Black Lives Matter voices. And that wasn't enough. And so the following year, we hosted a symposium, a very powerful one, on implicit bias. I will tell you, during the COVID, one of the things that I have learned is that we are two cities. And, as much as we've been able to, our anchor organizations and congregations have been able to pivot to online worship and virtual ministry, those who don't have the resources have not been able to. And so we have been working with the tech community to seek resources and platforms to assist faith leaders in some of the more vulnerable neighborhoods in San Francisco to be able to better minister to their congregants, and especially to communicate with them, as is so important right now. Additionally, another need that we have understood is mental health services. So we are working right now with the Institute on Aging, and some key leadership in the African American community to set up a dedicated friendship line that will be trained staff from within the African American community to be able to help address the mental health needs of that sector. Additionally, I've worked with the presbytery here because I know how interested they are, and we've helped through our relationships in this field to create connections so that resources can be shared.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for joining in on this conversation today. I know that it's going to be greatly appreciated, lots of good information, and I'm honored to have you both join in. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy, for all you've done.
Thank you, Betsy.
No
I'm
problem.
glad to have you a friend.
You're too kind. See you.
Okay. I am so excited to be moderating this panel of interfaith leaders. Thank you all for taking your time out of your busy days to do this. We are so grateful to be able to learn from and with you. We asked our panelists to consider 3 questions today. They're a little wordy, so please bear with me. First is, what does your faith tradition teach about difference or diversity? Or put another way, how does your faith inform how you relate to and treat those who are different from you? Number 2, tell us about a personal experience with racism or prejudice. What is one thing you learned from that experience? And number 3, what can your faith tradition offer as a way to right the racial injustices and bridge the divides we are witnessing in this country? And how might your faith tradition address the racial injustices that exist in this country? Because each person only has a limited amount of time to share, we ask that they answer the 3rd question for sure, and then to choose whether or not to answer the other 2 questions. For simplicity's sake, we've chosen to go in alphabetical order by last name. I will give a brief introduction of each panelist, and each of you are welcome to share a bit more about yourself. I know for those of us at Calvary, who you are is just as important as what you know. And we also understand that you don't necessarily speak on behalf of your entire faith tradition, but from your own perspective as one person who has been shaped and formed by that tradition. So first up, we have Fatih Atesh. He's the director of the Pacifica Institute, San Francisco and East Bay branches. He's a current member of the San Francisco Interfaith Council Board of Directors, and Fatih shares from a Muslim perspective. Fatih?
Thank you, Joanne. It's wonderful to be here, in virtually. So first, I would like to thank Calvary Presbyterian Church to include a Muslim voice in this important discussion and the conversation. And it's good to be back to Calvary, actually. The Calvary Presbyterian Church is always graciously hosted our Interfaith Ramadan dinner. So I'm so glad to have this collaboration and this relationship. So that's why I said glad to be back, even virtually. So, so I believe the importance of togetherness and the collaboration and the work among the different faith traditions is important more than ever. I hope it's not a cliche. So, but I think this is what we observe, all this polarization and the rising the hate and etc. So I think this collaboration and understanding and the showing the respect is important more than ever. So in order to achieve this togetherness and the collaboration, in my humble opinion, I would like to elaborate the importance of connection with our own tradition and our texts, if you like, connection within people who around us in the same tradition, and connection the society that we are living in obviously have many different opinions and the colors and the traditions. So when I say with our own tradition, pretty much in my study and my colleagues here, I'm sure very respected colleagues and the religious leaders are here, that shows that almost all religions, traditions teach some sort of dignity of human being, concept of love your neighbor, concept of the love the other like yourself. Actually, I give a speech and the presentation about the common word, especially for the Muslim and the Christian tradition, to love your God and to love your neighbor tradition, how we should and come together in based on this tradition. So, however, we have this concept, we have this tradition. However, as an individual, as a religious leader, even, how much I connected this tradition, how much my actions and my words aligned with these teachings. I understand that. I think in my faith tradition, in the Quran, there are many voices, and I think the Quran and the Bible and the Torah and the many faith traditions has the same situation. I believe that is multivocal, and many people can justify their positions. And when I look at the history, for example, in racial problems in the United States context, the Southern people was really traditionally religious people, and then they justify the Bible to their position. But the Northern people using the different passages from the Bible to justify their position as well. So I understand the traditions has multivocal, but in my perspective, how do we focus on change and for a common good, right? So in Islamic tradition, we have two main sources. The one is the sacred text, Word of God, the Holy Quran, and the second is the messenger of God's, Muhammad's words and actions, and how he implied the revelation into the life. So when I give the example, please keep this in your mind. When I say the Word of God and the Quran, and the second is not the divine, but how he, the messenger of God, implied the revelation into the life. So I would like to share some examples of the tradition, how the Islamic tradition teach us for seeing other, right? So seeing the love, the concept of the love, the human being, right? So here's some example from the holy text of the Quran. O mankind, indeed we have created you from a male and a female, and made you peoples and the tribes and the nations, that you may know one another. Indeed, most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most pious and the righteous of you. And the second verses I would like to elaborate, the God signs, God revelation, even because it's ayat, the word in the original ayat, the signs and the revelation is the creation of the heavens and the earth, the diversity of your languages and your colors. That's the signs of the God. Indeed, that are the signs for those of knowledge. So when I look at these verses, that I understand that is diversity is actually God's will. How the God, the willing to create us in this way. And another example, actually, the common story of the creation of Adam and Eve, right? So in the Bible and the Holy Quran, and in my knowledge, so we have the same common story, right? And we can find this in the Holy Bible and the Quran. So if you believe in your tradition that you have same ancestry of Adam and Eve, what supremacy, what superiority are we talking about to one another? Or if you choose to understand the creation of evolution, right? Or the evolution, if you want to choose the explanation of the evolution, it goes to the same creation again. right? So what kind of supremacy are we talking about here if our ancestry goes back to the same creation? So the second area, this is the first area of the connection. How do we connect with our sacred texts, and how do we implement this idea in our actions and in our words? The second area of the connection I would like to talk about, how do we implement equality and the dignity in our own mosque, in our own church, in our own temple or the synagogue? So when we look at the early history of Islam, and the Muhammad's weaves on the anti-racism. So the point I would like to make in here, not being an racist, or actually I'm talking about the being an anti-racist, right? So your words and the actions actually implement the change of the racism, right? To implement see the equality and equity, racial equity in here. So when we look at the early history of Islam and the Muhammad's view on the anti-racism, and come to life through his friendship with Bilal, Bilal, an Ethiopian slave who rose to a leading position in the early Islamic tradition. One of the story relates to Muhammad defended Bilal against the type of racist actions and the verse against the Bilal, and Bilal eventually became the muezzin, like the khazan, or like the cantor of the community leader, responsible for calling Muslims to the 5 daily prayers. Is actually again putting someone in the very powerful position from the minority, or to showing that we are equal in front of God. So the second profound example from the Islamic history I would like to mention is from the farewell sermon of the Muhammad, delivered in the front of almost all entire Muslim community in 632. In this sermon, noteworthy manifestation of the Prophet Muhammad stand on anti-racism. He stated in the sermon as the Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor non-Arab hasn't any superiority over an Arab. A white person has no supremacy over a black, nor does a black have any supremacy over white, except by piety and good action. So I think when I look at the Martin Luther King speech in I Have a Dream speech, he actually talked about the similar concept, and he says that my 4 children I am dreaming that play, threatening not because of their skin of color, because of their character. Right? I think I see the parallel in here. How do we see people? How do we who is superiority in what level? I think that's only for in front of God, the piety and the actions and the good actions, being a character person, being a good character person. So, and I would like to wrap up all my thoughts. The example of when I look at the civil rights movement and the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he was a pastor in a black church. And black church, in my humble opinion, played a great role to create civil rights movement, right? So when you think about the Martin Luther King, before he was a civil rights leader, before he was leading marches, before he was giving, I Have a Dream speech, he was a pastor. He went to the seminary. The reason he went to the Alabama was he got hired as a pastor of a church, and he grew up in a church, and his father was a pastor, so deeply religious. And this really speaks to the importance of the black church, because it came out of the black church, these powerful ideas of the liberation, about empowerment, about the dignity of every human being. And they actually transformed the religion, the church, use it as a system for liberation. They came together, they prayed together, they cried together, they laughed together, they sang together. They created that energy, that movement. So even the civil rights movement was driven by the women like Rosa Parks, Ella Baker, right? So where did they get the first lesson of the moral vision? From that church. So I believe as a religious leader, we have moral obligation to mobilize and inspire our people for racial justice and positive change in our own mosques and the synagogues and the churches. I also ask in my preach and my speech to our congregants to help us. Don't just say, hey, good luck for the change, right? So please help us to part of this change for a common good. I hope we can create this connection in our own clan or in our own tradition and we have broader community through the collaboration. I hope. Many thanks and God bless.
Thank you, Fatih. Thank you. Next, we have the Reverend Victor Floyd, who is the Minister of Spiritual Care at Calvary Presbyterian Church. Victor has sung for Nancy Pelosi, as well as others, at the San Francisco Interfaith Council's Thanksgiving Prayer Breakfast, which some of you have been to. And Victor brings us a Christian perspective. Victor?
Thanks, Joanne, and thank you to everyone here on this panel. I'm honored to be part of this. The first question was, how does tradition, my tradition, teach about diversity? And I want to thank Fatih for highlighting some really positive things from the Christian faith tradition. It echoed to me the theology of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who found a new way to be church in the African American church in New York City. That is truly a model of liberation for right now. But if we look at history and the Christian tradition in history, I tend to agree with my friend Cynthia, who says that she starts with the Inquisition and then works her way out in both directions. The Christian tradition is a cautionary tale historically. The church has been the source of death and great pain for a lot of the world, but also it has been a source of great blessing and healing, feeding and clothing, sheltering and loving. In more recent years, and by that I mean the last 100, every denominational offshoot in the Christian church has had to deal with diversity. And it seems like almost every new denomination starts because it breaks off from another denomination that excluded the people who are starting the new denomination. It's a former moderator of the Presbyterian Church, Al Wynn, called that history the history of sin, the way that we have decided who's in and who's out, who's good and who's bad, and actually kind of gotten in God's way a lot of the time in our tradition. Within the PC USA, our denomination, Presbyterian Church USA, the movement for the appreciation of religious pluralism has not been without rancor and all kinds of wild accusations. And I go back to an apocryphal book in our tradition, Ecclesiasticus, that says, if you choose to answer the calling to do church, to be the church, to be a faith leader, just prepare yourself for the ordeal. And yeah. So I wanted to quote also, the next part of the question was, how does my faith inform how I relate to those who are different? And I thought of this John Calvin quote that the best wisdom we possess, the best theology we have consists of two parts: our knowledge of God and our knowledge of ourselves. And it was the knowledge of myself as a member of the LGBT community that has really landed me in ministry. In order to claim my personal faith, I had to depart from my tradition. So I wanted to wear this collar for any LGBT kids out there, any LGBT adults who are out there who feel excluded by the church, there is a place for you in the Christian church. By following the call, by answering the call, it helped me understand the pain and exclusion of other communities that have been marginalized or discounted, diverse populations, and people who don't believe everything in the creeds as a checklist, but rather as going back to what John Calvin said, how does God reveal through yourself and through your personal experience, being created in the image of God. Even within Calvary, we have a lot of theological and political diversity. And this has deepened my faith even more. As the person on staff who goes to hospices and hospitals to be with people as they are leaving this world, I have witnessed really almost without exception, just the walls tumble down, and humanity is what connects us in spirit. And those differences, even the differences we celebrate as diversity, they fall away too. All of that falls away. And I have had the honor of seeing the true self come forward and eclipsing the false self that we present on a daily basis. The next question, tell about your personal experience with racism, and I'll try to be quick. I see my time ticking. I taught in the Atlanta public school system, Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from, Georgia. I taught there in the early 1990s in the Performing Arts High School in the Atlanta public school system, Northside School of the Arts. The Atlanta public school system is 96% African American, or it was at the time. For our big assembly one day, all of the School of the Arts came to my room. I had the big chorus room, and we had chairs set up. It was like the Queen was arriving. We hosted playwright Pearl Cleage, who's just a magnificent writer. And when she spoke, she began by saying, you will never meet a white person who is not a racist. They will tell you they're not, but they are. They will think they're not, but they are. She left it right there. She didn't try to explain to me anyway. The students knew what she was talking about. The Black students knew. And they could tell that I was just destroyed by that statement, because I loved my Black students, and I had been raised to, not be better or worse than anybody else by my parents. And the Black students took me by the hand and walked me through realizing how racism is baked in to the structures and the systems, and they showed me up close examples in their homes and just in how they had to ride public transportation an hour and a half to get to school, just really concrete ways in their young lives that they had dealt with systemic racism. It's baked into the American pie. As insulted and defensive as I was as a young 20-something learned school teacher, it's my Black students who took me by the hand and really just taught me something profound. And I thank them. I'm still in touch with them online. I hope they're watching. What can our faith tradition do about injustice? Well, I think it's really just real simple. We can tell the truth. We can claim that Jesus actually meant everybody, and that there is to be no dividing walls in Christianity. That's straight from the Bible. No dividing walls. That we can say that no one is without sin, and we have to mean ourselves when we say that. And we have to somehow claim that social justice is part of our tradition. It is biblically based. It is our calling. Welcoming the stranger, showing hospitality to those who were not born in this country, to people from another tribe, air quotes, loving our neighbors and not judging one another and leaving all that judging to God. It is really a holy practice. So I just urge all of you to stand up and speak up and show up, and most of all, just be a testament to love.
Thank you, Victor. Appreciate that. Next, we have Rabbi Jessica Zimmerman Graf. Jessica is the senior rabbi at Congregation Shares Israel. She is a current member of the San Francisco Interfaith Council Board of Directors, and she brings to us a Jewish perspective. Jessica?
Thank you so much for including me in this panel. It's really a privilege to be here as part of this interfaith conversation and to continue the wonderful work that Sharet Israel and Calvary have done together over many, many years. I'm very happy that alphabetically where my name falls gave me the opportunity to hear from two colleagues from other faith traditions first, because I recognize so many of the values that both of you shared from your own traditions as shared values, and in many cases from shared texts. I want to focus a little bit on a couple of Jewish values that I think are very much guiding principles for us. And I would say throughout the Jewish world, but specifically as Reform Jews, we are very much a community of inclusivity. First of all is the concept of B'Tselem Elohim. The Hebrew term means created in the image of God, and it is our belief, which is at the core really of our Jewish practice and values, that each human being is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And given that, God is certainly a very interesting and diverse character, since each one of us represents what God might look like or be like. God is a multifaceted and complex force that encompasses all of what we are and who we are as humanity. And that belief of human beings being created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, is at the foundation of Jewish belief and also the belief of many faith traditions. But I think it guides us when it comes to issues in our modern society and looking at the way that the world has unfortunately created a hierarchy and a system of disenfranchising many people. So that idea, first of all, I think is a way for us to look at our differences and to recognize the richness and the beauty in diversity and also the holiness in each person. Jewish mystical practice teaches us that God's love and God's presence in the world was so enormous that it burst out of the container that it was in, allowing holy sparks to fall onto the earth. And those holy sparks ended up in each one of us. And I love that idea of the holiness of God, a tiny little bit of the holiness of God having ended up in each person, regardless of manifestation of sexual orientation, gender, race, hair color, eye color, any of those things. A spark fell equally into all of us. So as others have mentioned in our Abrahamic traditions, this notion of love your neighbor as yourself, these words that are shared by many faith communities but come from the shared Hebrew and Christian Bible texts, really inform the way that aspirationally we might live. You know, we don't live that way always, but it's something that we look towards. I want to share another concept that comes directly from the Hebrew, which is tikkun olam, and that's repair of the world. This notion of the broken vessel where God's presence was so large that it kind of came out and so enormous and guiding, allowing the sparks to fall down, leaves us with a great challenge to repair the world. And it is through this notion of tikkun olam, the repair of everything that we see around us that is broken, that we get an invitation on how we might live. It is our privilege and responsibility, we believe as Jews, to do our work in the world, to repair the world, to make it a place where there is as much justice and equality as possible, ushering in a messianic time. And we believe that through our own works and humanity's shared effort to arrive at equality and respect, dignity for all people, that actually we will help to bring the Messiah to this world of ours, which is broken, and to create a messianic age where we will actually live with those values guiding us. Whenever we are together as a prayer community, we sing the beautiful words of Micha Mocha, which is a prayer thanking God for the freedom as we were taken from the narrow place, from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, out into a place of free choice and free will across the Red Sea. And it is the prayer that was recited at the Red Sea by our ancestors, the ancient Israelites, that we recite when we're together. We are reminded by this prayer of our fundamental foundation myth as a people, the story of our being taken from slavery to freedom, and the story of the obligation that comes with that, to help to bring freedom and justice to our broken world, falls upon all of us. And so we end our prayer services with a prayer called Aleinu, which literally means it is upon us. It is upon us to make this world a better place. It is upon us to ensure righteousness and right behavior. It is upon us to bring tzedakah, which is translated not really as an English word, but as justiceness, as a concept of righteousness and tzedek, of complete justice in the world, that we call upon ourselves to contribute to. The Torah teaches us, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice shall you pursue. And we hope with this verb, as we continue to pursue, knowing that we haven't yet arrived there, that we will continue in this incredible pursuit of justice and of a just world as we work to repair the world and to bring dignity to each one of God's creatures created in God's image. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Jessica. Thank you for sharing that. Next, we have Ron Kobata, who has recently retired from serving as the resident minister at the Buddhist Church of San Francisco. Ron is a former member of the San Francisco Interfaith Council board, and he brings to us a Buddhist perspective. Ron, thanks for joining us. Remember to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry for that glitch, self-caused. But anyway, thank you for this opportunity to join my colleagues in this special engagement, and to thank Betsy Dodd for inviting me to join this panel. And so I had to question whether I'd be eligible or not, given that I moved from San Francisco or escaped from San Francisco. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, so very quickly, I'll just go through your questions as quickly as I can and get into the dialogue later. But I always use this joke. What's the difference between a Buddhist and non-Buddhist? And the punchline is, a non-Buddhist thinks there's a difference. The thing is, Buddhism acknowledges the world is interdependent and interrelated. So it is naturally made up of differences, but that's all comes together in what we call spiritually our oneness. So that's the basic principle, paradigm, and that's the basic law of physics, that everything's interconnected, interrelated, and nothing exists alone. And that's all predicated on the fact that everything's always changing, impermanence. So when we speak of the so-called truth, the Dharma, that's basically acknowledging what is in terms of our experience of life, is that it's impermanent and interdependent. So that's the idea of our diversity, is the natural condition of our existence. We are all diverse and very unique. And to be able to appreciate that is how we may address the mentality that separates, that judges, one is better than the other, and all that as part of the delusion of our separateness. Okay, so that's how I relate to, the fact that things are different and unique. And so the second, in terms of experience, what came to mind right away is World War II and the internment of my grandparents and parents. I'm a product of that. I didn't grow up knowing what camp was, other than someplace my folks and grandparents were. And I actually grew up at one period thinking, I'm going to go to camp too. But that's the experience of that prejudice, or as they acknowledge now, the racism and the, inability of the government leaders. So they all just totally throughout the Constitution and all the so-called civil protections that all United States citizens were supposed to have access to. But of course, the causes and conditions of that period of history were that, no, that doesn't apply to Japanese or people of Japanese ancestry. And that was the situation. And so that's the danger of, well, we're supposedly living in a democracy, but we're also very fallible, and we could even say foolish human beings. That, all these high ideals and all these principles, when they don't serve us, just go out the window. And we could see what's happening now. that mentality is even more pronounced in terms of the, I can't use his name, so I just keep using the acronym POTUS. P-O, what is it? T-U-S, the POTUS is, really challenging, or showing the limitations of justice, of law and order, of all the people to be talking about law and order. But anyway, okay, so moving on. Let's see. Oh, going back to Fatih, I threw out in his panel a few months ago, that I see ourselves as being soul brothers and sisters, S-O-U-L, and sometimes people wonder, so what? I thought Buddhists don't think of soul. Well, that's the individual soul. But when I think of soul, I'm talking about S-O-U-L as sharing one universal life. And so in that spiritual sense, we're all soul brothers and sisters, because nothing's excluded. That's the reality, that everything is inclusive. That's just physics, right? But anyway, within our own, dualistic or deluded thinking, we separate. And that's why I always was so impressed when I watched this interview of Stephen Hawking. And when the interviewer asked, oh, what do you think was before the Big Bang? And his response was, no boundaries. So where do boundaries come from? From the Buddhist perspective, from our thinking. We make the differences, we make the distinctions according to what serves us as far as it's not so implicit, but our own biases. Or they call it the tribal mentality. And so this is the idea that we're all sharing this life together. And so to try to see the bridges that connect us. And so in doing that, we're kind of encouraged, as I appreciate it, to become self-reflective, to become more introspective, or now the popular term is mindful. So becoming more mindful of the truth, the reality, that we don't exist for, alone. And that's where we're encouraged to question, not the world out there, but the world of my own thoughts? Can I claim to be so free of bias, of prejudice, of bigotry? Have I always been selfless in how I interact? Not only with other people, but with the world. I mean, the environment we're all a part of. And so that's the other challenge, right? With our global warming and the other kinds of problems, and even with the pandemic, not taking responsibility and just making up our own rules. And these are the challenges, but I think the way we will address it is by questioning, not our government, but our own thoughts. And that's what I see as the idea of mindfulness. And when we speak of the other, because in our Shin Buddhist tradition, we do talk about other, but we use it in terms of what we see as other power, in contrast to self-power, our own individual assumptions, our own individual attachments, which is basically creating the separation or the dis-ease. And to speak to Rabbi Graf's point, the idea of holiness, I think, is very interesting, because I've read etymologically, it comes from the idea of whole, W-H-O-L, what is it? E. And that is related to holy, H-O-L-Y, which is also related to health. So the Buddhist approach to life is becoming spiritually healthy, which is whole, one, connected. And in that awareness, we would say, in our tradition, we tend to emphasize grateful. Grateful for the innumerable causes and conditions. And that's the universal life. In our tradition, interestingly, I've seen there's a Hebrew expression of amita, which meant life. In this Buddhist tradition, amida means immeasurable light and life, wisdom, compassion. And that's the spiritual source that sustains and embraces us all in oneness. So thank you for this opportunity. And okay, I know I always feel I'm preaching to the choir in these kinds of interfaith gatherings, because, we're all kind of related to each other in terms of appreciating that bigger perspective. So in a way, we're kind of in our own little world and somehow the Patas can't relate to it, but that's what we can all continue to affirm as our spiritual mission. So thank you. And
thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
Appreciate
Layla,
it.
you want to say hello? Oh, okay. My 5-year-old granddaughter just walked in.
Hello.
Hey, come on, just say hello. They want to see you.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for letting us borrow your grandfather. All right. Next we have.
No, we're not going to finish it. Almost. Okay.
Okay. Next we have Kaushik Roy. Kaushik, you are the current chair of the San Francisco Interfaith Council's board, right? He is also the executive director of the Shanti Project, which is one of San Francisco's oldest community-based nonprofits supporting people with cancer and HIV/AIDS. Kaushik brings to us a Hindu perspective. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Joanne, Betsy, and Calvary for including me in this great conversation. There is an ancient Indian parable that I love to share. Thousands of years ago, the Divine Incarnation, Lord Rama, asked his faithful friend Hanuman, Hanuman, how do you really see me? And Hanuman, who himself would later become a god through his faithful, devoted service to Rama, replied with this, my Lord, sometimes I think that you are the whole and I am a piece. Sometimes I think that you are the master and I am the servant. But when I contemplate the absolute reality, I realize you are I and I am you. And this last line, you are I and I am you, not only is it the driving force in Hinduism's way of addressing social injustice and inequities, it really is the genesis and the final destination of all Hindu thought. Hinduism is derived from the ancient anonymous scriptures known as the Vedas, which is a vast body of literature. And amongst all the stories and materials in the Vedas, perhaps the most important message is just 3 words long, and that is Tat Tavam Asi. Thou art that. You are that. And what is that? That is your real nature. It is who you really are. Sat Chit Ananda. Infinite knowledge, infinite consciousness, infinite bliss. And that is why we are here. The purpose of human life, according to Hinduism, is that we may think we are our individual selves, but our purpose is to realize we actually are not our individual selves. Rather, we are this one infinite existence, and everyone else is also this one infinite existence. And some of you may be familiar with the Indian greeting of Namaste. I think people have been using it more actually in our world of social distancing. But you may have seen Indian folks when they first see each other or greet each other, they put their hands to their heart and might give a little bow like this and say Namaste. The meaning of that is the infinite in me recognizes the infinite in you. I see myself in you. And so Hinduism prescribes a lot of different paths in how to experience this realization, but none are more prominent than the path of selfless works, of selfless services. In fact, a very well-known idea in Hinduism is the idea of serving humanity as God. You serve humanity as God until you see God is humanity. And the first Hindu monk to come to America, Swami Vivekananda, actually said, always take the position of the giver. Give everything and never look or expect for anything in return. Give your love, give your service, give your help, give whatever you can, whatever little thing you can. For if you want to see God, it is through giving that you will directly see God. And those who see God in the weak, who see God in the sick, who see God in the marginalized, those are the ones who truly worship God. And for those who might only see God in the books or might only see God in pictures, their worship is only preliminary. So this is the idea of how Hinduism addresses diversity. The fact that diversity in some ways we call or refer to the illusion of multiplicity. Yes, we are all distinct and different in our individual selves, but our real nature, the peace that passes all understanding, Shanti, Nirvana, all the different cultures and faiths have different words in it. That is achieved when we see the oneness in everyone. And so I'll close with a final thought from the Gita, which encapsulates what I just said in the last few minutes, which is that the ignorant work for their own profit. The wise work for the welfare of others and the marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hoshi. We are at time, but I promised that if I would give you all a chance to speak, if there was something that came up for you as others spoke that you'd like to respond to before we close. So if you have something brief that you want to share that was sparked by what someone else said, you're welcome to do that. You can unmute yourself and maybe share a word or two if you'd like. Hearing none. Thank you all. It was amazing. Oh, go ahead, Ron.
I wanted to throw in my little gimmick that I used when I was a preacher, that I like creating acronyms for different ideas. Okay, so I'd like to share, since there was the Reverend Floyd mentioned Martin Luther King. And so that reminded me, well, I shouldn't say remind, I already had this prepared. so the acronym, I like to use in place of, what is the goal of our religion, as far as I see the Buddhist idea. And typically we say enlightenment, which means to be awakened, to live according to that awakened awareness of our oneness. But anyway, so I thought enlightenment was kind of too cerebral for me, so I came up with an alternative, which is to come alive, L-I-V-E, because I read, or actually I was listening, I think it was at an Interfaith Council breakfast when Reverend, what's Floyd's last name? Semel was giving a talk about this Reverend Howard Thurman. And I don't know if you're familiar with him, Howard Thurman.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so he was a mentor to Reverend King. And then he came to San Francisco, what was that, in the 50s or something? And he founded a church here in the city, or there in the city, that is called the church, it's still there, the Church of the Fellowship for All Peoples or something. Well, anyway, so Reverend Semel brought up one of Reverend Thurman's quotes, which was, let's see. Oh, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Okay, so that's what I'd like to offer, is the acronym ALIVE. I don't know if you can see that. Okay.
A little higher. There you go.
Okay. So Layla was, colored this in for me, but so ALIVE, aware, loving, inspired, valued, engaged. So that's how I see our spiritual life, is to come alive with the awareness of our oneness. And the basis of oneness is love. And then that's the inspiration for us to realize the universal spirit that gives us life. And spirit, as basic meditation means, is paying attention to your breath. Well, I got to be careful up in Portland, but anyway. But with that inspiration, you begin to value this momentary experience in eternity we call our human existence. And that all comes from this sense of being engaged, connected, one with. So that was my closing reflection. Ron. Thank you.
Thanks for that visual as well. Thank you. Fati, I think you unmuted yourself. Did you want to share something?
Last thing I want to say, as always, it was wonderful to hearing the Victor, Kaushik, Ron, and Jessica, what you just said. And I think when I listen to all these wonderful people, I feel that I can become a better Muslim. All these traditions, I think they're teaching me, pushing me actually to become a better Muslim. So thank you. And I encourage to all people, to just make a friend from out of your clan, make a friend, and actually have some meaningful connection with someone from out of your synagogue or your church or your temple. I believe you feel that you're gonna feel that I can be a better person. So, thank you.
And no one had any excuse for not doing that in San Francisco. Go Fati.
Right. Right. Well, thank you again for being with us this morning. Your thoughts and insights are inspiring, and I think they give us real hope. I think when different faiths can come together to honor and uphold the dignity and humanity of each other, even the greatest divisions can be bridged and the greatest injustices righted. I am so grateful to have you all as partners in this work. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Betsy, Victor, and David.
Being able to moderate that panel was so much fun. Thank you all for joining us today. I want to thank Michael and Rita, Fatih, Victor, Jessica, Ron, and Kaushik for their time and for their commitment to justice that is deeply rooted in their faith traditions. We are so grateful for what you are doing and that we get to take part in it. A huge thanks as well to the Calvary team who helped make this happen, to Kathy Baer, Betsy Dodd, and David Barnes. If you want to know more about the work of San Francisco Interfaith Council and about our interfaith partnerships, there is a slide at the end of this presentation with their website and more information. Please join us for more of Calvary's online learning opportunities. Next week, we will premiere a few short films in a series entitled Stories Beyond Borders. Love your neighbor, hear their stories. Members of the Living Sanctuary team also had the ability to speak with one of the filmmakers and a member of the Working Films team. So we hope you will join us to watch the short films together and to hear the Q&A that follows next Sunday at 11:30. Thank you again for joining us this morning and have a blessed day.